friends, here we are. We've got a snow day. I was going to find a little snowman gift for you. Maybe I can put it in the email when I remind you to take a look at this today. We have to keep moving. Our time is running short in APUSH until we get to the test. And so I really wanted to prepare you for what we can do tomorrow. And it'll be hopefully a fun debate. But we need to do a little work ahead of time to get to there. Now, we had just started on this slide when we were together. I will see if I can do this the right way. There we go. All right. So as we were talking about the Spanish-American War earlier in the week, we talked about how, the United States, what was the causes of the Spanish-American War, and was the United States were we pushed into it? Were we bullied into it? Did we really have a necessity to do it? But because of the Spanish-American War, we gained a lot of area from Spain. Spain ceded a lot of land to the United States. And so the Treaty of Paris was that acquisition of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. In fact, we didn't really look at this political cartoon very much. But if you look at it, this is from May 28th, 1898. You see Uncle Sam there, and that's actually McKinley standing there. And it's the bill of fare. And so he's at a restaurant and he's like, what should I take? I hardly know what even to take first. The bill of fare, Cuba's on the menu, Puerto Rico's on the menu, the Philippines, the Sandwich Islands are on the menu. And so the United States gains a lot of this territory. Well, as we get into the United States-Philippine War, we see that it's basically, unfortunately for the Philippines and people like Emilio Aguinaldo, that one. He was a president, he was a nationalist, and he led the kind of forces against the United States because essentially it was trading the Spaniards for the United States. And the Filipino nationalists realized life isn't actually really better. We aren't any more independent under the United States. And so it went to war for quite a long time. And the United States basically had control of the Philippines, but it really showed the flex and the might of the United States at this time of what seems to be imperialism, when for a very long time we vowed to stay out of these affairs. We said we aren't going to get involved. There's a video that I'm going to have you watch actually. Here, maybe I can pull it up. It's embedded right here, kind of behind me. I'm going to stop this slideshow. I'd like you to take a moment here, and I'm going to lower this. I'd like you to take a moment and watch this video. It's 6 minutes and 29 seconds. I'm not going to take the time to watch it. It's the one embedded right there. This is Tom Ritchie, the guy, we've heard him before. But he talks about kind of the presidents during this time of expansionism and imperialism. So take a listen to that video because it's a good indication of now America's role in the world. And so we talk about this time of this open door policy, and Tom Ritchie will mention this, of what's going on in China. Well, China is massive, but they're going through this difficult, their own kind of revolutionary time. And so each of these countries who are vying for areas of expansionism around the world realizes it's like the time to pounce. And the United States is really no different. We wanted to be like, oh no, we're so much better. We're not going to carve up China. We would have loved to have a piece of it. But other countries are kind of pouncing. And so we almost feel like we need to do the same in other areas. This is TR's big stick policy. Teddy Roosevelt, this is a cartoon of Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt famously said, walk softly and carry a big stick. And this was his big stick policy. And you can see he's in the Caribbean here. Now, this is kind of the idea of, the extension of the Monroe Doctrine. He basically said, we're going to use the stick and we're going to beat off anybody who's coming into the Western Hemisphere in the Caribbean and South America and Central America. It's like, it's ours to protect. the United States. It's ours to protect. And so I'm not going to be aggressive, but I'm going to battle off anybody who comes and kind of sticks their nose into our business. And when I mention that, I need to talk about basically what's going on in the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal has not yet been dug. Colombia, I think it's under Colombian control, has control of this time of basically the area of Panama. The United States, along with other countries, realize, hey, if we could dig a canal through here, it would cut trading time, it would cut shipping time by more than half. Like it would really cut down rather than having to go all the way around in South America. And so basically, with the help of the United States, the Panama Canal is dug, and we really look at it. The United States looks at it as, our project, and so now we have control of that area. And so we talk about like the Roosevelt corollary, and Roosevelt looked at protecting the Caribbean and protecting Latin America as part of our duty, our role to extend the Monroe Doctrine. Yet, I think a lot of these Caribbean nations and Central American and South American nations are kind of thinking, well, we don't really need you. We don't want your control. But America is inserting its dominance at the time. And there's lots of naval successes. We see the rise of the Navy very much at this time, and because of industry, we have a lot of ships and industry that's happening that helps our military, especially our Navy. Okay, so you watched that video, and so now we're going to kind of keep going here. Now, I had mentioned this already. Remember, Woodrow Wilson is the president at the start of World War One, and he ran on the campaign of he kept us out of war. Well, how much did Wilson keep us out of war? Wilson looks at this kind of has this moral diplomacy. And Wilson basically wants to be friends and alliances with people who he thinks are the right type of countries to support democratic ideals. However, if you watch that video, like, I don't know well, there's another video that we're going to watch as well. Democratic ideals for whom? Remember when I told you how Birth of a Nation, that very racist KKK movie, came out at this time, and it was shown in the White House. Wilson endorsed it. And so the idea of moral diplomacy is sometimes a little bit questionable. Okay, so here we go. Before we even get into this slide, I want you to I'm going to go to this one. We're actually going to watch this together, and I'm going to split you into groups. Okay, so we're just going to take a listen. We're going to watch this.
What's up, everyone? Today in History with Means, we're taking a look at World War I, getting you ready for your exam, or just so you can look smart at the coffee shop. So after initial neutrality in World War I, you know how America be. We never show up on time to those world wars. But as the war went on, Wilson and the United States were having difficulty in trying to stay out of this war. In fact, in the election of 1916, Wilson is running for re-election, and meanwhile, Europe is a hot mess, because remember, World War I is one of our first major industrial wars. There's all this new technology. There's trench warfare, there's these horrible new weapons like the tank and poison gas, and this is causing widespread death and destruction amongst the various parties involved. Now, after initial neutrality in World War I, there was a lot of different things happening. The sinking of ships like the Lusitania. A lot of ships were being sunk. You have the Zimmermann telegram that Germany sends to Mexico, intercepted by the British. And this causes a lot of Americans to demand that President Wilson do something about it to preserve American neutrality and our honor. And as with all things in history, things get way more complicated, because you recall, yes, Americans died aboard the British ship, the Lusitania, but that ship was also carrying weapons, which the Germans didn't want the Allies to get a hold of. So with all these things, violations of our neutrality, the Zimmermann telegram, the nation entered the conflict. And the war had been going on since 1914. In America in 1917, April said, "What up? We here." And it's important you know This was departing from the US foreign policy tradition of non involvement in European affairs. And another factor you should keep in mind is it's also in response to Woodrow Wilson's call for the defense of humanitarian and democratic principles. Wilson really believed that World War I would be the war to end all wars. Remember, Wilson, he has this moral diplomacy. So not only is he trying to end war forever, but he also claims to be fighting it to make the world safe for democracy. And there's a little irony there because American women are going to be protesting him during the war because of their lack of voting rights. And not to mention, African Americans throughout the American South were denied the right to vote. So yes, we get into the war a little bit late, but we go into it with these lofty ideals. And although the American Expeditionary Forces played a relatively limited role in combat, the U.S. entry helped to tip the balance of the conflict in favor of the Allies. So think about America's combat role in World War I in the words of Drake. We're here for a good time, not a long time. He's horrible. Although the Great War is not fought on U.S. soil, it's important you also know about the impact of World War I on the home fronts, the increased demand for war production and labor during World War I and the sequel World War II, and the economic difficulties of the 1930s led many Americans to migrate to urban centers in search of economic opportunities. During both wars, you have the government forming different agencies trying to regulate war production. You have women getting new opportunities as the men are off fighting. And you also have, in a great migration during and after World War I, African Americans escaping segregation, those Jim Crow laws, racial violence with the rise of the Klan and lynching, and limited economic opportunity in the South. They moved to the North and the West where they found new opportunities but still encountered discrimination. Another aspect of the home front that you should know about is this: official restrictions on freedom of speech grew during World War I. So we claim to be fighting this war to make the world safe for democracy. So not only do you have various groups like women and African Americans in many states being unable to vote, at least at the onset of the war, you also have restrictions on freedom of speech with things like the Sedition Act. Prompting these restrictions on freedom of speech also was increased anxiety about radicalism, led to a Red Scare. There's this fear we're going to have a communist revolution. Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution happened during the war, and this leads to attacks on organized labor and unions and immigrant culture. You're going to see a lot of this play out during the Palmer raids right after the war, as well as the Sacco and Vanzetti trial during the 1920s. Aside from the home front, you should know World War I and its aftermath intensified ongoing debates about the nation's role in the world and how best to achieve national security and pursue America's interests. Remember, Wilson had his 14 points. This was his plan to kind of create peace for generations to come. But a lot of the European powers, especially three of the big four, England, Italy, and France, largely rejected Wilson's 14 points, and they wanted to increase their colonial holdings and kind of punish Germany at the end of the war. Wilson was deeply disappointed in his 14 points being largely abandoned, but he does have this League of Nations that he wants to get put in place. And despite Wilson's deep involvement in post-war negotiations, he's over in Europe trying to make a deal. The U.S. Senate refused to ratify the Treaty of Versailles or to join the League of Nations. So the Senate, led by Republicans, basically say, nah, we're not joining this thing. And the guy who creates the League of Nations, Wilson, and the country that creates it, the U.S., doesn't end up joining the League. Now, if you want some more information about World War I, get all the little details that help you get.
Okay, so I think you heard a lot of things actually in that. We'll go to back to the presentation. You heard a lot of things in that video about things that we've already discussed. The Sedition Act, the passage of suffrage acts for women. We talked about the Red Scare, those race riots, the War Industries Board, as industry is increasing and we're selling a lot of that material for war to those countries. So a lot of things that we've already talked about. So we're now into World War I. So I had a whole kind of like activity, and you know me and shuffling you around, but I had an activity for us, and we'll kind of do a very, very abbreviated version of it. And so I want you to start thinking like this. I'm going to put you into a group, and here's kind of the idea of it, okay? So The first group is about nationalism. Now, you remember that nationalism, and you probably learned this last year in world history. Nationalism is pride for one's country. It's this very devout loyalty for your country. And there is a big rise of nationalism in Europe at that time. America as well, but especially in Europe, because Europe is so tightly compacted. If you were French, you identified as French. If you were Italian, you identified as Italian. You didn't really identify really as your religion anymore. You identified as your country. And the rise of nationalism is one of the big factors that led to the beginning of World War One. So, in the nationalist group, I would like to have Rachel, AJ, and Hannah. Okay? Another factor of the beginning of World War One is militarism. Now, if you talked about militarism last year, militarism is also a kind of a rise in the military, a more important impact of the military. And basically, it became the way to solve disputes. You know, rather than diplomatically and talking things out and negotiating, the rise of the military was a signal to other countries like, well, we're just going to fight it out and we're bigger and we're stronger. And so that became a big, people started seeing, you know, this movement of troops sometimes, for sure, the rise of the military and gaining more troops and getting more materials. Other countries saw that as an aggressive move. And so this is also one of the things that contributed to the beginning of World War One. So in my militarism group, I would like Eli, Nick, and Zoe. Okay. Probably one of the bigger issues that led to the beginning of World War One is the assassination. I mean, I feel like it was the tipping point, right? We're going to talk about, there's several different issues of why the world went into the war to end all wars. It wasn't the war to end all wars. 20 years later, we will really see the war. But the Great War, as World War One was known, probably wouldn't have started when it did if it hadn't have been for the assassination. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand. He is the prince, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He goes down to Sarajevo, which is under the control of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he is assassinated, both he and his wife. This is in June 1914, and we see very quickly, within a month, just a few days actually after, the world, at least Europe, going to war. And the reason why I say the world is because we're going to see, with another reason, about some of the beginnings of World War One, or some of the causes of World War One, why we call it a world war. So those who are on board with the assassination of why it's one of the most important reasons for World War One to begin is Gus, Charlie, and Grace. Okay? Expansionism. Now, as I had just mentioned, why this is called not just a European war and a world war is because of this great amount of expansionism and imperialism around the world. Countries are vying to expand their empires and gain more resources. It's one of the reasons why we find ourselves in Guam in the Philippines. It's why France is in Vietnam. It's why Britain is in India. All these countries are looking to expand their territories, go outside of their boundaries to find those resources, to be in those strategic locations and make their empires very, very wealthy. So expansionism or imperialism is one of the huge reasons why it's not just contained to Europe, and why it's more of even broader world war. And so those who are going to be on kind of the expansionism front as one of the biggest causes for World War One are going to be Madeline, Michael, and Joe. Madeline, Michael, and Joe. Eli, Nick, and Zoe, you are militarism. Madeline, Michael, and Joe, you are expansionism, imperialism. Okay? And then finally, these alliances. Now, there are alliances, there are these friendships made, and I even kind of mentioned it with Wilson. Wilson very much wanted to be allies with those countries that he felt supported his kind of moral ideals of what democracy meant. And so the alliances became these, like, how strong could our alliance be? If I can get strong countries to back up and come on my side, then my kind of perspective of the war is that we can win this thing. And so the Central Powers, in World War One, these friendships that had been formed and had been made during World War One, are Italy, Austria-Hungary, and Germany. Now, there's going to be a couple others in there, and those are actually important. Most importantly, the Ottoman Empire, who we call the sick man of Europe, actually joins the Central Powers. That becomes an important part. That's something you should have learned in world history that we can't get into in US history, but I think you understand the significance of the Ottoman Empire at this time. On the Allied powers, that's like France, Great Britain, and Russia. Then we know Russia leaves. You know all about, the Russian Revolution. So Russia pulls out of the war right about the same time the United States enters the war. And so the Allied powers are what the United States saw as more democratic ideals for fighting this war. Okay, so in the alliances group, it's going to be Josie, Leah, Tommy, and Peter. Okay, so nationalists are Rachel, AJ, and Hannah. Expansionists are Madeline, Michael, and Joe. The assassination is Gus, Charlie, and Grace. Militarism is Eli, Nick, and Zoe. And alliances are Josie, Leah, Tommy, and Peter. Okay, so I want you to think about from that angle how you are going to, tomorrow when we get to class, support the 14 points. So if it is a matter of maybe emailing your partners and saying, okay, of these 14 points, you can see Woodrow Wilson's 14 points here. What is the most important? Wilson drafts these 14 points for peace, but a lot of nations don't see peace as a resolution. Like, they are angry, they are mad, they want revenge. Those who feel like, especially Great Britain feels like Germany started the war. Well, they want to punish Germany. They don't want to let Germany off the hook. Well, Germany is also kind of saying, like, we weren't the only ones fighting in this war. Why do we have to be punished so severely? And so take a look at these 14 points and think about it from your angle. You are really on board of the causes of the war were because of nationalism. The causes of the war were because of expansionism or the assassination or militarism or those alliances. So you might have to do a little bit of background information about, what was going on, and then take it from that angle about the most important 14 points. Okay? So I would like you to read about the 14 points. This is a very basic list right here. I'll move my picture over. This is a very basic list. I will also put kind of an explanation of the 14 points on Schoology, so you can come to class and be ready to debate why you should or shouldn't follow the 14 points, what the most important ones are, and then ultimately, if your group would be the group to join the League of Nations. Wilson starts the League of Nations, or he wants to start the League of Nations, and the United States itself doesn't even get involved. Like, our president thought up this idea, and then Congress rejects it and does not even join it. So it's a very interesting topic to talk about. So we're going to have a debate tomorrow. All right. This slide right here, I think you heard about both. We'll talk in great detail about Wilson's 14 points, but you heard about the sinking of the Lusitania, I believe, in that video. This was, what I will say is Germany warned, they took out a newspaper article in American newspapers saying, do not get on passenger ships coming to Europe because if you do, we're giving you fair warning right now, we might blow them up. This is a time of a lot of naval warfare, unrestricted naval warfare, and German U boats. And basically, the American government was sneaking supplies in passenger ships to send to Europe. But the passengers probably didn't know that, even though they've basically been warned. The United States were putting these materials on there. And so the sinking of the Lusitania was a big deal. However, in Germany's defense, they did say you can't put war materials that are given to your alliances on a passenger ship. And that was happening. And then the Zimmerman telegram. And I look at the Zimmerman telegram as like, all right, like that's probably, I mean, we intercepted this telegram and we figured out this is basically they're trying to get Mexico to come on the side of the Central Powers. And then in return, they're going to help, back from the Mexican-American War, they would help Mexico gain back the territory that they lost to the United States. Wow, like this is, 60, 70 years removed now at this point. I can only imagine the United States is like, wait, what? Now we have to worry about Mexico, our southern border friends. They're going to get involved in this world war. And so the Zimmerman telegram was probably the final coffin, nail in the coffin. And so think about that if you're one of the people in the alliances group, how this is all going to work. Okay? So that's your job, is to research not only the 14 points, but how your group would look at the 14 points. What are some of the most important of the 14 points from your group's perspective, whether you are a militarism, whether you're expansionism, nationalism, about the assassination itself, or alliances, and then decide ultimately, are you going to join the League of Nations? Now, I'm not giving you a nation, I'm not telling you which one you have to belong to, but I am kind of forcing you into one of those themes. Okay? So, can't wait to be there tomorrow. I am the judge and the jury, and we'll see who wins this debate. Until we meet again, goodbye.